Hello, and welcome to my final lesson on filmmaking terms and analysis. This is the 11th lesson in the series, and it's the second lesson about sound. So when you're writing down your vocab terms, make sure you have that sound vocab document open, and we'll finish up the final vocabulary terms for this unit on filmmaking vocabulary. Of course, let's start with a question. Can you think of an example where the sound you hear in a film does not match with what you see on the screen? You've already learned about ambient sound, so perhaps you're thinking of sound that creates that ambient environment, like the sound of birds. We don't necessarily see those birds on screen, but they add to the ambient environmental sound. Or the sound of crowds. We don't have to see the people on screen to add the sound of those crowds. Anything that is not on the screen can add to the environment, to that ambient sound that we hear to place us in a location. Perhaps you're thinking of the L cut and J cut, where we hear a character but we don't see them on screen. Instead, we see the reaction of another character listening to them speak. For this lesson, we're going to focus on some sound terms that will help you analyze more complicated situations involving sound design. When an editor incorporates sound into a film, they need to consider the juxtaposition between the sound and the images we see on screen. This lesson is going to consider how does the sound interact with what we see? How does the sound and the visual collide to create meaning? We learned the term juxtaposition when it comes to combining images, but it also applies to combining sound with images. So let's jump into our first term, and that is synchronous sound. Synchronous sounds are sounds that match what we see on screen. They match the timing of what we see on screen, and they match the source of what we see on screen. We see the thing making the sound, and it matches with the sound itself. Most sounds in film are synchronous, such as dialogue and Foley sounds that match with what we see on screen. In these two examples, you can tell from the subtitles that the sound the character is making matches in time with the sound we hear. These are just a couple of the many examples that you'll see in film of synchronous sound. Usually when sound is out of sync, there's a problem. Hopefully, my sound is in sync with my lips. When sound is recorded externally from a different device than the camera itself, filmmakers will use a clapper board, which will make a clapping sound, or they'll use their hands to make a clap on screen so that they can see where their hands connect and match it with the spike in the sound where the clap sound is being made. This helps the editor match the visual with the sound, making it synchronous. Next up, we have the idea of on-screen sound. On-screen sound emanates from a source we can see on the screen. In the example on the left, we see students talking to each other, and in the subtitles we can see the sound is the sound of students whispering. So the sound of the students whispering and the students on screen tells us that the sound is on-screen sound. In the example on the bottom right, we can see the police car driving away with flashing lights, and we can tell from the subtitles that the sound is the sound of a siren. The police siren is on-screen sound because we see the source of the sound on the screen. Next up, we have off-screen sound. If the police car was not on the screen, we would call that off-screen sound. Off-screen sound is our next term. Off-screen sound derives from a source that we do not see on the screen. In the example on the left, we can see that students are gasping and chuckling, but the presenter is not making that sound. The presenter on screen is not the source of the gasping and chuckling. It's the off-screen students. So the sound of the students gasping and chuckling is off-screen sound. In the example on the right, we're hearing the sounds going on outside of the house. The sounds of the car door opening and a person reacting to something in the car by screaming. It's all off-screen sound. The editor is juxtaposing the reaction shot of the character in the bedroom with the sounds coming from outside. These sounds are off-screen sound. Next up, we have the idea of internal sound. The most common example of internal sound is when we hear the thoughts of a character. This is not simply voiceover narration. This is specifically used for the thoughts of a character during a scene. This is the active thoughts of a character in the scene, in the moment, which we as an audience can hear. Internal sound is diegetic for one character. It is logical that one character can hear these thoughts. In this example, the sound of the character saying, "I should get some coffee," is a thought inside of his head. This makes it internal sound. Now I'd like to show you an example that I created of internal sound. Let's take a look. What am I even doing? Making videos for every lesson? Are they even watching them? These take me like 8 hours from recording to editing. Is it even worth it? Someone has to be watching. There has to be one. Maybe a future filmmaker. Yeah, there's one out there. There's one student who's devouring this content, and they'll be better for it. There's a future filmmaker watching this right now. I'm doing this for them. It's all going to be worth it. In the example we just watched, the sound of my voice is internal sound. The sound of the environment, the cars and traffic in the city, is not internal sound. That's ambient sound, it's diegetic sound, but it's not internal. It's not coming from inside of the character's thoughts. Only the voice is internal sound. Next up, we have the concept of faithful sound. Most sound in most films is faithful. Faithful sound is when sound accurately replicates what a voice or action is supposed to sound like. In this example, you can see that the Foley artist is faithfully recreating the sound of walking in mud-caked hay. They are creating sounds that logically match and accurately fit the actions that are happening in the film. As a sound designer, one of your primary goals is usually to create faithful sound. Sound that is accurate in replicating what the real-life sounds in a film should sound like. In this next example that I created, I'm attempting to create faithful footstep sounds to match the footage of walking upstairs. Let's take a look. Those sounds were recorded on a phone using a free audio recording app. I aimed the bottom of my phone towards the sound source, towards my feet, as I walked on a similar surface. Some editing was done to lower the volume and synchronize the sound with the image. Each footstep sound was cut out and placed exactly where feet connected with the surface so that they were synchronous. And my intention in doing this was to accurately replicate the sound of walking upstairs. So my goal was to create faithful sound. Next up, we have the idea of non-faithful sound. Non-faithful sound is usually found in comedic situations or cartoonish films or perhaps during a hallucination or dream sequence. Non-faithful sound is when sound does not accurately match its apparent source for dramatic or comedic effect. In this example, if each footstep was to make a boing sound, that would be non-faithful. And I took that as inspiration for the next example that I created. Let's take a look. For that example, I made a silly popping sound with my mouth and matched it up. It's still synchronous, it still matches with each footstep, but it is non-faithful. It is not accurately replicating the sound that would logically be produced by a foot hitting the ground. This was done for comedic effect. Our next term mainly applies to music, and that's the concept of empathetic sound. Empathetic sound is when the music or sound effects match the mood of the action, participating in the feeling of the scene. In this example, we see that a son is disappointed by something his father said, and sad music is played. The music matches the son's feelings, thus, this is empathetic sound. Let's take a look at my example of empathetic sound. Don't worry, I'm not actually crying, those are eye drops. Let's take a look. Since I'm trying my best to act sad and sad music is being played, that matching of the moods, of the feelings, makes the sad music empathetic sound. This would also apply to happy music, chaotic music, scary music. If it's empathetic to the situation, it matches the feeling of the scene. Next up, we have the opposite. The opposite of empathetic sound is anempathetic sound. Anempathetic sound is when the music or sound effects contradict the tone or emotion of a scene. Anempathetic sound is also known as contrapuntal sound. Remember, it contradicts the feelings of the scene. In the example on the left, we see images from the Vietnam War, and innocent people are being hurt. But the song being played is What a Wonderful World by Louis Armstrong. This is a happy song. This is a song that cherishes life and everything that's beautiful inside of life. So what we see is a contradiction to what we hear. We see images of suffering and war, but we hear a happy song. This is anempathetic sound. This is contrapuntal sound. It contradicts what we see on screen and the feelings of the scene. Anempathetic sound is going to make you feel unsettled because, for example, you might hear something happy while watching something sad. In the example on the right, we also have anempathetic sound. We have a person being murdered by being thrown out of their apartment while we listen to Nat King Cole's Unforgettable, which is a song about how unforgettable someone's lover is. So it's a song about love, but we're watching someone be murdered. Those feelings of someone being murdered contradict those feelings of love in the song. Those feelings of hatred and murder contradict the sound of love in the song, making the song an empathetic sound that contradicts the feelings or tone of the scene. So what if I take the sad music from my crying example and replace it with happy music? That would be an example of an empathetic sound, and it might be kind of funny. Let's take a look. Can you feel the contradiction? We see something sad, but we hear something happy. It makes us either feel unsettled, or in this case, you might think it's kind of funny. And that's okay. I think it's kind of funny too. Next up, we have the idea of subjective sound. Subjective sound is sound heard by a single character that we assume cannot be heard by other characters in the scene. This is a classic example of subjective sound from Saving Private Ryan. Tom Hanks' character is having a kind of panic attack on the beach of Normandy as they storm the beach, and he starts to lose his hearing like he's about to pass out. And we can hear his loss of hearing. We can hear the sound get distorted and low, and then suddenly it comes back and goes back to normal. But while it was distorted and strange, we were hearing subjective sound. Remember, subjective is like opinion, and objective is a fact. So subjective is this character's personal experience. We're hearing this character's personal experience as he loses his hearing temporarily. Let's take a look. So as Tom Hanks' character is shell-shocked and frightened and losing his hearing, we experience that as well. We experience subjective sound. Let's take a look at my example of subjective sound. In my example of subjective sound, you'll see that I imagined a hallucination scene where someone is hallucinating that something is much louder than it really is. Sometimes the sound of a refrigerator can be kind of annoying. I decided to take that sound and amplify it, and then act as though I, as the character, could hear this loud, annoying sound from the refrigerator. Let's take a look. So in that example, the sound is subjective because any other character in that scene would not have heard the extremely loud sound of the refrigerator. My character is hallucinating that sound, imagining that it's louder than it really is, experiencing a distorted sound, and the audience is experiencing that distorted sound with the character. They are experiencing subjective sound. Next up, we have our final term. You've probably heard of the term flashback, but have you heard of the term sonic flashback? Sometimes when a character remembers something on screen, we might hear a part of that memory. That is a sonic flashback. In a sonic flashback, diegetic sound from earlier in the film is repeated later to indicate a memory. In the 1991 film Backdraft, the protagonist is a firefighter, and he's trying to track down someone who's been lighting houses on fire. He's trying to stop this person, and eventually he finds them and encounters them, but they're wearing a mask. When he catches this masked person, they're using the electrical socket to catch the house on fire. After they struggle, he pushes the criminal into that electrical socket, burning the criminal before he gets away. A screaming sound is heard when the masked attacker is burned by the electrical outlet. Later in the film, the firefighter protagonist is at the fire station, and he sees that a man in the showers has the electrical outlet burn mark on his shoulder. This person with the electrical outlet burn mark on their shoulder must be the masked attacker. This person must be the person behind burning all these houses. The sound from earlier, the sound of the criminal screaming when he was burned by the outlet, is heard again when the criminal is revealed to be the firefighter's co-worker. When he connects the dots in his mind, we hear the sound of the screaming criminal when he was burned earlier in the film. That's a sonic flashback, a sound flashback that carries us back to the scene without showing it to us, to remind us as an audience what it is that the character is remembering without him saying anything. And that was our last vocab term. For this lesson, I want you to do some sound editing practice. I want you to create a 30-second internal sound example. Remember the example where I was thinking thoughts that you as an audience could hear? I want you to create an example like that. For 30 seconds, I want to see your face without seeing your lips move. I want to see you thinking different thoughts, but I want to hear the thoughts separately through the speakers without seeing your lips move. This is going to require you to record sound separately from images. Create a scene of yourself thinking internal thoughts. This can be one long shot or a series of shots. It must be longer than 30 seconds, so 31 seconds or longer. Record multiple lines of dialogue. We should hear your thoughts throughout the whole scene. One thing you can do is record your thoughts first and then play back the thoughts while you act out thinking. This will help your facial expressions to match what you were thinking in the audio recording. Once you have an audio recording and a video recording, mute the video and apply the audio using an editing app. For my students, you'll use WeVideo. You'll turn the sound off on the video and you'll layer the sound from your thoughts. I want you to record the audio separately so that your lips aren't moving in the scene. When it comes to recording your vocals, I recommend you create a pillow fort. A pillow fort is like a miniature sound recording booth. You can speak into it without creating a lot of echo, and it helps to muffle some of the outside sound. Let's watch this example of myself recording audio using a pillow fort. This is an example of vocals recorded in a pillow fort. This is an example of vocals not recorded in a pillow fort. This is an example of vocals recorded in a pillow fort. This is an example of vocals not recorded in a pillow fort. This is an example of vocals recorded in a pillow fort. This is an example of vocals not recorded in a pillow fort. This is an example of vocals recorded in a pillow fort. First, find a free app on your phone for recording audio if you don't have a sound recorder of your own. You can share sound files from your phone to your computer using Google Drive. Next, place your phone or recording device into the pillow fort and record your thoughts. The pillow fort will help to reduce the reverberations in your room. It will help to reduce all those little echoey sounds and not make it sound like you're in a room, but to make the sounds sound internal, like they're just floating in space. In my example, I recorded ambient sound. I went outside and recorded the sound of the city to layer under my thoughts. Those sounds were recorded on my phone using a free audio recording app. Remember, the microphone on your phone is where you would put your mouth if you were talking to someone. You want to aim that end towards your sound source. Remember also, you can cover the microphone of your phone with fabric to help prevent the sound of wind hitting the microphone. If you're going to do that, hold the fabric tight against the microphone so it doesn't move around, causing another sound. The sound of fabric moving on top of the microphone is not good either. The best plan of attack to produce this project is to write down your thoughts and then perform them into the microphone using a pillow fort. After you've recorded that, find your location and record yourself in a video form. Play the audio while you act out the thoughts. I want to see you reacting to the thoughts. If the thoughts are sad, you look sad. If the thoughts are happy, you look happy. If the thoughts are boring, you look boring. If the thoughts are exciting, you look exciting. Try to get your visual to match the internal sound that you've recorded, and then combine them using an editing app like WeVideo. We don't need the sound from the video, just the sound of your thoughts. And you can add room tone or ambient sound separately. Record some room tone or record some ambient sound and layer them under your internal sound. This is my final lesson in my filmmaking terms and analysis unit. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned a lot, and thank you for watching.